Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly fascinating thought experiment straight out of the classic texts of the Risale i Nur. You know, if you love breaking down complex ideas into clear, logical steps, you are in exactly the right place. We're going to look at a seemingly simple physical interaction that happens in nature literally every single day, and we're going to use it to completely shift how we think about biological systems, mechanisms, and the very origin of order itself. We are talking about a tactile physical paradox that's sitting right beneath our feet.
Section 1. Root versus hard rock. An unlikely contest. Okay, let's dive right into this. Imagine you're holding a young, newly sprouted plant root in one hand and a solid, heavy rock in the other.
Just notice the stark contrast here. On the one hand, we've got the young root. It's soft, it's super thin, and it's incredibly easy to break, right? You could snap it between two fingers. On the other hand, we have the rock. Hard, dense, completely impenetrable. Now, if we were to pit these two against each other in a literal physical contest of force, well, actually, please don't go outside and try to punch a rock just to test this out. We really don't need to do that experiment to know the outcome. Common sense tells us instantly, the rock wins. The soft thing always yields to the hard thing. That's just basic physics, right?
And yet, underground, entirely out of our sight, roots do something absolutely fascinating. They don't yield at all. Instead, the soft root hits that hard rock and starts a highly systematic process. First, it grows into microscopic, tiny little cracks in the stone. Then, it actively releases specific chemical substances. And those chemicals literally break down the tough minerals of the rock. Gradually, patiently, the fragile root just finds a way right through the solid stone. The soft thing completely defeats the hard thing. It totally shatters our common sense expectation.
Section 2. The chemistry question. The how versus the author. So the Treatise on Nature actually asks us to pause here and make sure we don't confuse two completely different types of questions. Let's look at the first one.
If you ask someone how the root actually gets through the rock, they're probably going to tell you something like, "Science explains that. Roots release acids and other compounds." And you know what? Good answer. That is absolutely correct. It perfectly maps out the physical reality of the situation. The chemistry completely checks out. But I want to pull the rug out for a second here and introduce a slightly deeper inquiry.
So, the crucial question we have to ask is, did the root major in chemistry? Seriously, think about the sheer complexity of what's happening here. The root has to synthesize the exact right acid to break down the exact type of mineral it just bumped into, completely in the dark.
Does it reach a rock and say, "Team meeting, stop the growth, we've got a mineral obstruction ahead. Analyze the rock and prepare the correct compound"? No way, of course not. That sounds totally ridiculous. But we kind of have to ask these mischievous little questions to really highlight the absurdity of treating a plant like a conscious decision maker.
So if there's no team meeting, we've got to look at the anatomy. Where exactly is the laboratory inside this tiny, fragile root? Where's the sensory equipment doing the chemical analysis of the soil? Where is the brain doing the complex chemistry required to mix these specific acids? Well, the answer is, there isn't one. There's no brain, there's no lab. And yet this incredibly complex, highly specific mechanism works flawlessly every single time a root hits a rock.
And this brings us to the core philosophical distinction of our explainer today. Let's slow down for a second. Explaining the mechanism is important. Knowing all about the acids and the cellular growth is absolutely vital data. But naming the mechanism is not necessarily the final explanation. By simply giving a name to the chemical process, we haven't actually explained the origin of the intelligence that the process displays. We've just described what is happening, not why such an incredibly ordered system exists in a completely brainless root.
Section 3. The engine analogy. Shifting the paradigm. And this brilliantly illustrates our point, but to really hammer it home, let's step away from botany for a moment and shift the paradigm to something very mechanical and super relatable. Let's talk about cars.
Imagine you and I are having a conversation, and I point to a car driving down the street and I ask you, "Why does this car move?" You'd probably give me the most basic functional explanation. You'd say, "Well, because it has an engine."
Okay, fair enough. So I follow up and ask, how does the engine work? And because you're an informed person, you answer, through internal combustion. Fuel mixes with air, a spark ignites it, it creates pressure, and that moves the pistons. Again, a fantastic answer. You have perfectly described how it works. But then I ask the ultimate question. Okay, but who organized this entire highly complex system of pistons, fuel lines, and sparks? And imagine if you just yelled back at me,
I already told you, the engine. You can see the problem here, right? It's completely illogical to use the mechanism itself to explain the origin of the mechanism. The engine cannot be the author of the engine. The engine is part of the thing that needs explaining. Let's connect this back to our plant. Saying the plant releases a chemical is absolutely scientifically correct, just like saying the car uses combustion. But we cannot point to the chemical process as the creator of the chemical process. We still have to ask where that perfectly organized, highly responsive biological system came from in the very first place. The mechanism doesn't explain its own engineering.
Section 4. Beyond the mechanism, the knowledge-like order. Now, we need to zoom out from our micro-observation of the root and look at the macro-philosophical concept presented in our source texts, the words and the flashes. We're moving beyond the mechanism to look at the profound order underlying it all.
When you just look around, you see the natural world is literally filled with these incredible biological systems. Roots navigate complex underground terrain completely without eyes. Delicate leaves survive blistering, harsh sunlight without burning up. Giant trees transport hundreds of gallons of water straight up against gravity, all without a mechanical pump. Fruit develops perfectly packaged nutrients. And look, science beautifully helps us unpack and understand the how for every single one of these items on the list. But the Risala argues there is another deeper layer that we're completely ignoring if we just stop there. We have to clearly separate these two concepts. On one side, we have the how. This is the scientific mechanism, the chemical processes, the biology, the physics. It is absolutely vital, and it's true. But on the other side, we have the order. This is the question of the origin of that organized system that's even capable of making the response. The text we are studying today adds this absolutely crucial secondary question to our scientific understanding. It reminds us that mapping the gears of a clock doesn't actually explain the clockmaker. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with the ultimate inquiry that this whole thought experiment pushes us toward. Look closely at the delicate root shattering the solid rock. Acknowledge the brilliant chemistry making it happen. And then ask yourself, what explains the knowledge-like order behind the how?